Okay, hello everyone. I'm Saulis from Atform, and today I'm going to tell you about how we learned to love the data center operating system. Now you might ask, what the hell is the data center operating system? But from the logo here, you can probably gather that this is going to be about Docker, Mesos, all those good things. I should also give a bit of context, who is we here, and from this logo we can gather that we is Atform. So, and Atform is an online advertising full stack platform. So this basically means that we serve banners, we collect stats about who saw what, who clicked on what, these type of things. And to be more specific, I'm from the research team in Atform, and in research we basically do what we call smart ads. So these are the ads that seem to know who you are, that seem to follow you around, like you Google something and then they're all over you. Besides that, what else do we do in research? So things like forecasting, like we try to predict what kind of traffic will you generate. We do fraud detection, anomaly detection. There's a lot of things that you can do with the data. And what kind of data are we talking about? Well, for example, our real-time bidding engine, that's the one that's constantly buying ads in real time. It's currently receiving like 1 million bid requests per second, and if you want to actually do something with this request, you have to respond in 100 milliseconds. So it's a very real-time, high-load, big data, all those buzzwords kind of system. And for research, we currently collect something like 1 terabyte of data daily. So that's what we do the science on. Right, so this talk is going to be about the evolution, how we came to the current state in regards to Mesos, Docker, all those things. If you attended the talk by Daniel at 10 a.m. this morning, he basically outlined all the problems that you will eventually run into if you try to run Docker in production. And this is the evolution, the story, how we encountered most of those issues and what we did to actually face them. And I should note that we are running Docker and Mesos in production, I think, for about a year now. Right, so let's begin with the Middle Ages. So what happened initially a few years ago, when Atform decided that big data is cool, we should do something with it. We hired a bunch of data scientists. So these are people with statistics and math backgrounds, and we gave them data. Please give us insights. And of course, what they usually do, they start to play around. You give them an AWS account. They create VMs, which I put the names here, like test2, modeling. They install Python, R, whatever, all these numeric libraries. They do their science there, and that's that. Of course, one day you come in and you realize that suddenly this is production. This is not very acceptable. And of course, the obvious problem with this, I shouldn't be telling this, like if this is your workflow, you like install Python, some numeric library 3.12. You copy the script, you schedule it. Of course, one day you hear this phrase in the office, like, it worked on my machine, why isn't it working on the cloud? So obviously this had to change. So the next step I call Renaissance is when we realized that this is now serious production business, we should do this more properly. So as a side note, we started migrating out of the cloud because we have very picky clients who want their data locked up on their 7 logs. They don't want to give it to Amazon, so okay, whatever. And what we started doing, like obviously at this point, what are your options? You can, the standard choice is probably to go ahead and Puppetize all these things. But with Puppet, at this particular type of workload, it's a bit complicated because people use a lot of like numeric libraries most of them are native C libraries, and people use multiple versions of them. One project used one version, the other another version. You have the classical Python 2, Python 3 issue. And another thing is that most of these things, these data science algorithms, they usually run like daily or hourly or something like that. It's not a constant thing that is happening. So it would be kind of wasteful to just give each of these algorithms like a dedicated VM that sits there doing nothing most of the time and runs once every hour. And also, obviously, if you told the data scientists to go learn Puppet DSL and productionize all your things, they will likely not do it. So instead, we decided to give Docker a try. So at the time, it was a very hip thing to try. Obviously, we tried it. And the first stage was, well, okay, we wanted to start doing some more processing with the data, not only just directly science, but to process it a bit or whatever. So we wrote some Java and Scala apps. And instead, what we did is, firstly, we just used like OpenStack VMs, but we gave them very generic names like worker 1, worker 2, up to 10 or whatever. We just installed Docker using Puppet, of course, but that's the only thing we did with Puppet, just install Docker. And we launched our apps in containers on these hosts. So that's why they have these strange names. This is the default host name that the Docker container gets, some gibberish like that. Right, so this was the first stage. Now, obviously, yeah, okay, so a few words about Docker if anyone still doesn't know what it is. Basically, I would summarize Docker as a huge hack like on top of all these Linux kernel features. Like Docker itself is nothing magical. To illustrate that point, you can Google, there's a repo in GitHub called Docker, which basically does what Docker does in a few hundred lines of bash. So it's not magic. But all these kernel features are what makes this so special. So, for example, namespaces is a feature that lets you isolate your process. So what happens is you launch a Linux process, it gets, it thinks that it is build 1, so it's the only process running, and it doesn't see anything else what is happening in the system. You can use C groups to actually ration resources. Like you can say that this app is not allowed to limit, I don't know, 1 gig of RAM, something like that. Yeah, storage, they use like all these fancy things like copy on write to make the container start fast. They use layered file systems to compose the images. For network, they basically bridge all the containers on the host. I mean, we'll talk about networking later. Of course, there are security things that you can do, like with AppArmor, you can say that this container is not allowed to do something, and so on. So when you collect all these kernel features that existed for many years now, I think most of them, like you wrap them up nicely and you get Docker. So that's what it is, basically. And obviously, it provides a lot of benefits. So first of all, self-contained artifacts. So as I said, you no longer have to worry, will Python 2 or 3 be available on the production machine. You can just put it there yourself. You get an isolated runtime. Basically, there's no overhead because I said this is just an ordinary Linux process. Of course, you can put like constraints on it, but otherwise there's no virtualization. It's just running natively. And also what's nice is that if you package all your apps into containers, then you can start to think how to unify all your deployment, because deploying a Java app or a Python app or a Ruby app, like, it's a whole different story every time. But if everything is in a container, you can do something nice. Right, so when you start using Docker, you immediately run into issues. I think this is the first issue, at least from my experience, that people run into when using Docker. So the whole mantra of Docker is that you prepare an image, and exactly the same image will run on your laptop, on a dev environment, and in production. That makes sure that everything is like repeatable, reproducible, consistent. Everything is nice, but like, where do I put the actual, I don't know, password for my database? Like, it has to be different somehow. So initially we tried a lot of things, like maybe we tried to copy the config files to the host and map it inside the container. That's not very nice. Eventually, after trying different things, we settled on using environmental variables for this. Like, basically, what you do is everything that is environment dependent, like endpoints, usernames, passwords, you just pass through environment variables. It was very nice that when we discovered this manifesto, if you will, on the internet called the 12-factor app. I really encourage everyone to read this, pray to this, and follow this. So basically, one of their 12 points was exactly this. So we kind of got verification that this is probably the right way to go. Yeah, it has a lot of advantages. Yeah. And also, there's a hidden advantage to using environmental variables. Like at first you may think, but it's just key value pairs. How do I pass my maps and lists or whatever to the config? But actually, this forces you to parameterize as little as possible. And this has the added benefit of making sure that your app is as identical as possible, whether it's running in production or in the dev environment. So this forced us to make sure that is the case. Right, so of course then you start thinking, okay, now I launched a container. In the old days we just logged to a file somewhere, but if this is a container, once it finishes, everything gets destroyed. So, well, what do I do with the logs? Where do I log? But again, I would argue that if you are running your containers, this becomes a bit easier because as of a few Docker versions ago, actually Docker allows you to use custom logging drivers. So actually what you can do is you can just, when you're installing Docker, say that whatever an application logs to std out or std just send it to some central place like Logstash or Kibana. So in some sense, it's even easier. And also one of the 12 points in the 12-factor app also reiterates this point. They're saying that all apps should just log to std out and be done with it. An app shouldn't care where the logs end up. With metrics, I just thought I'll mention like a very interesting issue that we did not anticipate at all. If you are using Graphite, what happens is like if you redeploy your application, in the old days, your metric key would be like something like server hostname dot application dot some metric, I don't know, CPU load. But if you're running in containers, you shouldn't use the host name. Like, you never know where your container, maybe the next day it will run on a different host. Maybe you will run 2 instances of the same app on the same host. Like, you should use the host name of the container, which is this gibberish string. And actually, if you're using Graphite, this eventually becomes an issue. If you know how Graphite works, like on every new metric key, it creates a new file, which it pre-allocates. You quickly run out of space. It doesn't want to show you the new metrics immediately. Like initially, we would wait for 15 minutes after the deployment to see like where are the metrics. So there's something to think about here. Right, so now moving on to the modern era. Like before I showed we had like 2 workers, or more workers where we would run the containers on, but what we would do before, we would just shuffle the containers manually. Like you would manually say, okay, this app will run here, this one will run here. If something crashes or there's not enough resources, you manually reshuffle. But somehow that seemed a bit not optimal. So instead what we did at that point is we adopted Mesos. also you see that now all of the containers are running on a single pool on a single block. So at this point you could say that this is the data center operating system, like all the applications run somewhere. As far as they care, they're running on some single pool of resources. And of course we thought that why use virtualization, let's just buy a bunch of powerful physical servers and just run everything there. So what is Mesos? A few words about that. So if you look at this graph, at the bottom you have what are called Mesos slaves. So a Mesos slave is like this physical server at the bottom. So it provides like resources, it gives you CPUs, RAM, disk, network, etc. You run a process called Mesos slave on there. Then you have some processes called Mesos master. Basically these are well, you can run them on the same physical machines as the slaves, but conceptually what the master does is basically oversees the whole pool of resources that is available, and it knows where stuff is running, and it can schedule new tasks somewhere else. Of course you have Zookeeper since it's distributed, and on the top you have what are called frameworks. Now, a framework is basically a user of Mesos. Let me just walk through the workflow of how everything works. Basically, what happens is that the slaves constantly report to the masters. Only one of them is active at any given point in time. Basically, what they're saying is, hello, I'm slave 1, I have 4 CPUs, 4 gigs of RAM, you can use that. The leader collects all this information, and to all the frameworks that register, it is offering these resources. Like it's saying that Mesos as a whole now has these resources. Maybe you want to do something. And one of these frameworks might decide that, yes, I would like to launch one task. It will need 2 CPUs, 1 gig of RAM, something else. And it tells this to the master, and the master actually launches the command that was specified. And Mesos is not really tied to Docker. Like Docker is an option, but you can also launch native apps that don't have to be packaged in containers. But we use it together with Docker in conjunction. Now, so what are these frameworks? So, for example, one framework that is very popular on Mesos is called Marathon. It is called the init of the data center operating system. And the reason is that Marathon, what it does is it has an API. You tell it, I would like some application called MyNginx. It will be a Docker container. Here is the image. I will need 1 instance, 0.5 CPUs, and some RAM. Please launch it somewhere. And Marathon communicates with Mesos. It finds free resources, launches the app. And what it does after that, it constantly makes sure that the app is still running. So if a slave goes down, if the network gets lost or something, if your app is unreachable, Marathon will reschedule the application somewhere else. It also provides constraints, so you can use constraints to control where your app is running. For example, maybe you want to launch an app together with some kind of database or whatever, and you want them to be as close as possible. You can do that using constraints. You can, for example, say that please distribute my application as equally as possible among all data centers. Things like that. And it also provides you, it works as a deployment tool in some sense. So what I mean by that is, when you launch an app like that, you can tell it things like, here is the health check of the application. A health check may be some HTTP endpoint. And Mesos will constantly check that health check and make sure that it responds. It can do these blue-green deployments. Like you can tell it to gradually roll out my application. Things like that. So it's nice. Right, so if this was the init of the data center operating system, we also use what is called Sprint, and if you've never heard of it before, it's because it's a tool that we wrote on our own, which we call the exec of the data center operating system. So this is in some sense similar to Mesos. It has a similar API, but what it does is you just give it a container and it just launches it and basically tells you once it's done. It doesn't try to keep it running or stuff like that. Just one off. Here's the container, please run it. That's why the name here is Marathon Sprint. So hopefully we'll open source this soon. And I should also mention why we wrote this. Why not, for those of you who are in this area, why not use Khronos? Basically, the reason was that we already have a fairly sophisticated scheduler also in-house, and compared to our scheduler, Khronos is very trivial. So instead, what we decided to do, we'll keep the scheduler, just plug in Sprint to actually launch the apps. So maybe one day we'll even open source the scheduler. I'm not sure about that. Okay. So now, after you hear this, you might ask, okay, so I have to tell it how much memory will it need, like how do I know how much? Well, maybe this is not, this is an easy question, but there are subtleties with this. For example, one thing we notice is that by default, if you launch a container and you tell it you will get 1 gig of RAM, and if you enter this container and say free, it will tell you that the system has 256 gigs of RAM. And we notice that some applications, when they see this, they get very greedy and they get killed prematurely. So you have to be aware of that. Another thing with memory is you should also be aware that if your app actually starts using more RAM, what will happen is that it will start to swap. So we also ran into this. We would see that suddenly an app is working and then suddenly, boom, like CPU I/O weight goes through the roof. So it started swapping. Maybe a more interesting question is what about CPUs and what is 0.5 CPUs? What is that? Yeah, another question I'll touch later, like what happens with the network. But coming back to CPUs, the first experiment you usually do is you put stress, this app called Stress that can stress your CPUs. You put it in a container and you say, I will give you 0.1 CPUs. You launch it on a 40-core machine, and this is what happens. So what is this? Is it working or not? But you should actually keep in mind how this works. So underneath, this is using C groups. And when you say 0.1 CPUs, this actually translates into CPU shares in C group talk. So first thing that this does is that in total, there are only as many CPU shares as you have cores. So if you have, let's say, 2 cores, well, C groups uses this 1024 for 1 core. Marathon gets translated to 1. So if your machine has 2 cores, you will have 2048 shares or 2 CPUs in Marathon speed, Mesos speed. So first thing, you cannot oversubscribe this number. You cannot, like Mesos will not launch an app if it does not fit into this limit. But if it does fit, like if in that example, you had 40 cores and you said, let's give it 0.1. So in that case, what this number means is that it's actually, it's a time sharing ratio compared to other processes. So if in that example, I would have launched another app with also 0.1 CPUs, they would divide the CPUs equally. If I launched another app with 0.2 CPUs, they would divide the resources 2 to 1. So you should keep in mind this is actually some kind of time sharing. This is not literally cutting off resources. Right, and this is underneath. This is the same as, I don't know, setting task priority. This is no magic. It just influences the way that the kernel scheduler. What time proportions does it give to processes? It's nothing very sophisticated. I should also mention that there are other C groups in the kernel which are not so easily accessible by default at the present day. For example, there is CPU sets. This allows you to actually limit your process to pin your process to cores. You can say that, please launch my app on this specific core. And it will not cross out of it. Memory I already mentioned. There's also block I/O. You can launch an app and limit its rate at which it's reading disk. An interesting C group is actually NetCLS that I think Meso supports from maybe one version ago. So actually what this C group does is it lets you, it automatically tags every packet that comes in and out of your container. By packet I mean network packet. So all of your packets get tagged, and once they are tagged, you can actually use standard Linux tools to control the traffic. You can, for example, give higher priority to some services. Like if you launch an API that is very low latency, and next to it you launch a process that is more like batch. So you might want to make sure that the API gets priority on the network use. So using this C group, you could actually achieve that. I should also mention, like we're not using this, but I should mention that these exist. So what happens with the network by default in Docker? If you launch a container, Docker creates a bridge on the host machine. All the containers and the host, they join this bridge through the virtual interface pair. So inside the container, it just looks an ordinary F0 or whatever. It gets an IP and so on, but actually outside, it goes through this bridge. And on top of that, Docker just does a lot of IP tables hackery to make sure that like if you linked containers, then they can reach each other. By default, they cannot. So it's just a lot of IP tables rules, actually. And as of late, Docker also introduced an option to plug in a different network driver. So these projects do exactly that. For example, Weave, I think it was already mentioned here today, Weave lets you define software-defined network. So the idea is similar, but you can span your overlay network across many hosts, even across data centers or the internet. And the way this works is actually it's very similar. I think they just do a lot of packet capturing and rewriting. So it's nothing and all of those things. So that's why they have an overhead, like 10 or 20% in the network, because they have to rewrite a lot of things. And another interesting project is Project Calico. So their approach is a bit different. What they do instead is they use, they actually launch like BGP pairs on each host. So your containers actually become legit members of your network. Like they get an IP that is actually routable through the internet, even if you want. So the BGP pairs, they know what's running where, they propagate all this routing information, but otherwise your container is just an ordinary citizen on your network. And the only cost to run in a container in that case is just the single network hop from the host to the container. So in theory, it should be nicer. I don't know how it's in practice. We haven't tried this yet. I should just mention that these exist. Right, and the final stage of the evolution I called the atomic age. And the difference here now is that you have these routers and storage underneath. So if you come back to the previous stage, you would see that all the containers that we run, like Java, R, or whatever, all of them were basically stateless. Worst case, they would read Kafka, or they would put something on S3 or whatever. None of them needed to be reached. They were just launched. They did their work. That's it. And none of them actually had a very specific persistence need. Everything was external. But lately, what we started doing is we started launching APIs here. So these are apps that need to be reached, microservices, if you will. And also, we felt a need that people really wanted to persist things. when running in a container. So the standard question, if you run an API or something else that needs to be reached through the network, like where is it? How do I reach it? Like if you're using Marathon to launch this, like when I showed this Nginx example, like what if the slave dies? The container moves to a new machine, so how will I know where it is? So you need some kind of service discovery solution. And since we're not using yet any of these IP per container solutions, so the standard way that Docker addresses this issue is that it does nothing. So it's basically rewriting ports. You launch an app that wants to be on port 80, but it actually runs on port 35,786. So to address this issue, currently we're using this project called Marathon LB, Marathon Load Balancer. And it's actually pretty simple. What it is it launches an HA proxy instance, and it's constantly in communication with Mesos to know what container is running where and on what port. So it constantly knows this because Mesos knows this. And it just dynamically reconfigures this HA proxy instance, and you can always reach your apps that way. We also have this project, it's called the Mesos DNS. So we also have a DNS solution. So what happens is when you launch a container, it automatically gets a DNS entry. So like task id.marathon.mesos.apps.com. But obviously two problems with that. First of all, DNS, you have this TTL issue, so you probably want to set it very low if you want it to respond quickly, and the issue with the ports, obviously, so DNS doesn't solve that. So we have those two solutions, but Marathon LB is the preferred one. So you can give your, if you give your app like a nice vhost, it just becomes app.appstorm.com on port 80, and our proxy does the rest. There's also this project, Autoscale Controller, from also the same people. We are not using it currently because we don't feel the need yet, but it's actually very trivial to do. You can just launch it, and you can define constraints, like you can say, if my app is under heavy loads, you can define what that is exactly. Please scale it. So it will constantly monitor Mesos to see what's happening. And if there is a need, it will tell Marathon to scale your app, and how proxy reconfigures and everything works. Yeah, so the next question, like what about persistence? Like as I said, if you launch a container, you can write to a file inside the container, but once the container stops, it disappears. So once it disappears, yes, it will disappear. So what do you do then? Right. So first of all, what happens is like, this is the default case. When you launch a container, the root of your file system inside the container will get mapped to something like varlib docker device matter blah 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 somewhere on the host, and this will disappear once the container is there. Mesos actually gives you this ability to reserve disks on the host. So what that means is when launching a task, you can say that opt-up cache should be persistent. So what Mesos will do instead, like it will create a folder somewhere else on the host, like varlib mesos slave volumes, and it will map it to this path inside the container. And if your app stops and restarts, it will remap this, and it will also reserve your container, like it will pin your container to a specific host. So if your app dies, it gets relaunched, everything is still there. Now I named this folder opt-out cache for a reason, because you should probably only use this for caches on the disk. Because if your physical host burns down, this data is lost. Besides caches, where is this applicable? For example, if you want to launch something like Kafka on Mesos. Because Kafka does replication by itself, like it always keeps 3 copies or 2 copies or whatever you define. this is okay then. If the host burns down, Kafka makes sure that there's still a copy somewhere. So this is perfectly acceptable. But what do you do if you want to launch an app? You don't really want to care about backups on replication and so on. What are your options then? The usual solution then is to use some kind of network block storage. So currently we are evaluating this Scale.io. We considered Ceph. Our IT people said maybe Scale.io is better. We're still trying to find out. The way this works is that again, this is a feature of Docker. Docker has this volume plugins architecture. So basically, when launching a task, you can say to Docker that use this plugin, and this is the volume name. So in this particular instance, we're using this plugin called Rexray, which knows how to talk to Scale.io. So basically, the workflow is you launch a task, you say Rexray, volume name something, and Mesos will actually do a mount on this host, and this mount will actually be like a network mount. So the kernel will mount this, and this will look like an ordinary file system, even though it's somewhere across the network. And of course, Mesos will map this inside your container. So it kind of works automatically. Your app gets moved to another container, everything remounts automatically, and you still have your data. So that is that. Now, when it comes to future plans, DCOS, so it's a bit ironic that when I was preparing this talk, like I used this concept of a data center operating system as somehow in a generic sense, but in the meantime, Mesosphere actually released a product that is called like that. They call it the DCOS, Data Center Operating System. We haven't yet adopted it yet, but we'll probably try to evaluate it. It seems to simplify the workflow a bit, so we'll look into that. Also, IP per container, like all these projects like Weave, Calico, these look very interesting. We don't yet feel a very particular need for this. Like if we were to launch some kind of low latency APIs or whatever, then maybe yes, it would be nice to have. But at this point, it's just academic interest in this. So maybe we'll do that. And obviously containerize all the things. So after a year in production with containers, well, of course there have been ups and downs, but overall it was a very pleasant experience, and I think we'll continue in this path. So by this I mean like we want to containerize the builds. So if we have a Mesos cluster with a bunch of machines and they're not doing anything, so why not build your apps there? Why not test your apps there? You can containerize everything basically nowadays. So yeah, with that, maybe I'll open to questions. Yes.
Yeah, we use Mesos on one of the main, one of the problems we have with Mesos is the upgrade. So how are you solving that?
You mean the upgrade of Mesos itself?
Mesos itself, yeah.
Yeah, in what sense do you have problems? Is it because you have to stop everything and upgrade it, or?
Skipping versions. You're not supposed to skip versions. So
okay.
You upgrade one by one.
Yeah, in that sense, we upgrade one by one, yes. But I would say the bigger problem is actually not with Mesos, but with Docker. Like if you want to upgrade Docker, currently, they promised to solve this problem, but currently, you have to stop all your containers, upgrade Docker, and then relaunch them, which is super annoying. But they promised to fix this, so maybe we will.
Thank you. Maybe more questions?